This is AUGforums.com Real Talk. First, thank you to our sponsors, APS Payments, Kenzium, and Velixo. You can learn more about how our sponsors work with Acumatica by going to augforums.com/sponsors. My name is Tim Rodman, and I'm coming to you live on Saturday, July 18th, 2020 from San Diego, California. This is episode number 19 from AUG blog audio posts to official podcast. This will be a shorter one, and I just wanted to explain the change in what I was calling AUG blog audio posts to what is now an official podcast. If you go back to episode number 1, you'll hear me talk about how this is not a podcast. I was specifically not calling it a podcast because it felt like too much pressure and too much commitment. I was calling them AUG blog audio posts because I was already doing the blog, and it was just another way, in my mind, to contribute content by doing it in an audio form rather than a written form. So that's why I called it AUG blog audio posts. But as time goes on, we're now up to episode number 19, and it's been going well. I really like the format of being able to interview people. I also like the format of being able to speak rather than type. I think I can get things out there faster by speaking. I'd still like to do blog posts, but they're just more time consuming, and so supplementing them with audio content allows me to get there. And so this has been going well, and I like it, and so because of that, I decided to make it an official podcast. Now there's a process that goes along with that. There's some fees to be able to push things out to the various podcast applications, and so because of that, we brought on some sponsors. So that's what you heard up at the introduction of this episode. And I also changed the introduction a little bit, you might have noticed. So we do have sponsors, and that's enabling us to make this an official podcast that you can consume in your podcast app of choice. Now, before we get into some of those details, a little bit about the name. I was just going to call it the AUGforums.com podcast, but there's some technical reasons why I guess you're not supposed to have podcast in the name. So I decided on AUGforums.com Real Talk. The goal here is to tie this as much as possible to AUGforums.com and all the stuff that's happening there in the forums, and also with the courses that are still on the radar to be launched. And so we got AUGforums.com in the name, and then Real Talk is just my way of saying, let's keep it real, let's keep it honest, let's keep it somewhat raw and as detailed and informative as possible. And I think if you go back and listen to the prior episodes, especially the episodes with interviews with other customers or other people in the Acumatica ecosystem, I think you'll find that it's a longer format than you would typically see in a more polished marketing video. But I think we get into a deeper level of detail than you would get in a polished marketing video. So it's nice to have both. You have these polished customer testimonials put out by Acumatica in these nicely done marketing videos. And then I'm coming along with AUGforums.com Real Talk, interviewing customers, interviewing VARs, interviewing anyone who uses Acumatica in a somewhat detailed way, and trying to dig in and get the real story. Not just the nice part, but what are the parts that need improvement. So that's why I'm calling this Real Talk. So that's the basic overview. Not a huge change, just going to continue contributing things. I will put out a call for anyone listening, though, another invitation for anyone who would like to come on and tell their story. The format that I'm finding works well for me is we just block out an hour, 1 hour, put it on our calendars, figure out a day and time that works. Typically for me in the evenings or even on the weekends works best, but we can work out a time. And then we get on, we just jump on to a call-in number. We can chat for a little bit. We don't need to do any prep except for maybe a light back and forth by email about what kind of type of general topics we want to talk about. And then we just jump on the phone call. We talk for a few minutes, kind of get an idea of maybe we've never even talked before on the phone, which is totally fine. We'll just kind of get to know each other a little bit for a few minutes. And then I'll just press record and we'll go right into it. Trying to keep it as low as possible. And I'm still sticking to the original 2 rules. The first one is no editing. So that's just part of the nature of AUGforums.com Real Talk. We're not going to do any editing. So if you sneeze into the microphone, if you say 500 times during the interview, that's no problem. That just comes with the territory. Don't feel embarrassed by that. There's no editing. And then second one is we publish it immediately because of the fact that there's no editing. Now with an interview, it's a little different in that once we stop the recording, I do a little outro at the end, then I stop the recording, and then we can chat for a few more minutes. Do we think it went okay? If it was a complete disaster, I just won't publish it. But as long as you're okay with it, I'll go ahead and publish it. So try to keep it really light. So if anyone would like to come on and do one of these, it's just an hour commitment. We'll go back and forth by email, real generally, and then we'll just block out an hour. We'll chat, we'll record, we'll chat at the end, and that's it. You're done. So I think it's a nice way to get your story out there, whether you're a customer, whether you're a partner, an ISV, whatever your status is, as long as you're using Acumatica in a somewhat detailed way and have something to contribute to the broader community, you are a candidate for an interview. So just let me know if you're interested in that. Now a little bit more on the technical side about what I mean by moving this from a AUG blog audio post to a true podcast. Nothing really changes on the blog side except for the URL. I was putting the episodes out at augforums.com/audio post with the number, but now I just simplified it .com/episode and the number. And on that page, you'll find the recording. You can also download the audio. But in addition to that, you'll also find related links. So things that get mentioned in that episode, you'll see links like to whoever got interviewed, for example, maybe a link to their LinkedIn profile, something like that. So you have related links there. And then I'm also expecting to have in the next 1 to 2 months transcripts available as well. That way you can quickly scan through and see if it's an episode that you'd like to listen to. So you'll find that on the episode pages, augforums.com/episode 19, for example, episode 19, to see this episode's page. But then, of course, you'll also see the audio and be able to download the audio just by using whatever podcast app you like to use. Then I also put up another page, augforums.com/podcast. If you go there, you can also go to augforums.com Real Talk, which will take you to the same place. And it's just a simple embedded podcast player that rather than having to scroll through the blog and just find the podcast episodes, you can go to augforums.com/podcast and listen there. You'll only see the podcast episodes. It's a cleaner page. And then in addition to the augforums.com/podcast, in addition to being able to use your regular podcast app, some people don't have a podcast app. I'm also expecting to have in the next 1 to 2 months a native app for the podcast. So in the next 1 to 2 months, you should be able to go out to either Google, the Android store, or the iOS store and download an augforums.com app, just a regular native mobile app that will have the podcast content there as well. So fingers crossed on that. So far, I think we'll be able to make that happen in the next 1 to 2 months, but that'll just be another way that you can consume the podcast. So as you can see, I'm kind of doubling down on this podcast format. I'm liking the format up to episode 19 now, and I got a ton of people I want to interview on the interview list. Also gives me a way to fire off a quick post in a sense, like I'm doing now, get some information out there without having to spend what is a lot longer amount of time typing up a blog post. So that's the update on now becoming an official podcast. All right. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of AUGforums.com Real Talk. Take care.